Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for the Arm of the Father Savage. This is the third encounter you'll face in Alexander Savage and often requires a bit of hand-holding. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your Savage guide. The first and most important thing for your group to figure out is player-specific positioning. There are so many mechanics throughout this encounter that require essential positioning, and getting used to your spot in relation to other players, the boss, and the room is imperative to success. The floor pattern helps in assigning specific player positioning, and I would recommend using it to your advantage. We begin by pulling the boss and taking him in the center of the room. The rest of the raid will spread around in their appropriate positions, using the dividing floor lines as reference. All players must watch out for his frontal cleave, fluid swing, and should take care to never stand in front of the boss at any point during the encounter. The first ability is PRTOEAN Wave. In Savage, this will hit twice. The first hit will be in the location of the telegraphed ground markers, and the second will be in the direction of 6 random players. This is where proper positioning comes in. Players can bait and dodge the first PRTOEAN Wave telegraphs before immediately returning to their original positions on each line. The positioning here will ensure that no 2 players get hit by more than 1 PRTOEAN Wave. Next up, healers will have to deal with Splash. This does a fair amount of damage per hit and will increase in duration and difficulty as the fight continues. Heal through as necessary. Up next, SLUICE. The boss will mark up random players with these blue markers, indicating they will be soon hit with splash damage. Players will spread to avoid cleaving one another. Before those hits go off, ground AoEs will spawn under random players. Players will need to continue avoiding each other as they dodge this AoE to avoid death from cleaving one another. Heal through as necessary. Heal through another splash and get ready for phase 2 by stacking up behind the boss. At this point, the boss will assume his hand form and begin by slamming the tank with Fluid Strike. Fluid Strike is a massive frontal cleave that should be shared by the raid to reduce damage. Tanks can also use immunities if they so choose. Up next, Wash Away will knock back players a set distance in a random direction. Stack in the center to avoid getting punted into the outside. Immediately after, Digititis will be cast, which will place 3 different markers on 3 different players. When the cast is complete, these markers will apply detrimental debuffs on each affected player. To avoid this, markers must be swapped appropriately before the cast ends. Since this can be a little confusing at first, let's break it down. The 3 debuffs, red, yellow, and blue, will place damage down, healing down, and vulnerability up on 1 damage dealer, 1 healer, and 1 tank respectively. Obviously, these debuffs will be highly detrimental to each of these roles if left on. Luckily for us, the fairly long cast time gives us time to swap these markers, essentially letting us control who ends up with what debuff. Ideally, after swaps, you'd want a damage dealer or a healer holding the blue tank debuff, a healer with the red damage down debuff, and a damage dealer or a tank with a yellow healing down debuff. You can only swap once, so all players must be on the same page. Communication is key here, and in our group we have the red debuff player swapping with our white mage, either at a set waymark for melee or wherever the ranged player is. Any unaffected melee will be grabbing the blue marker off of the affected tank. Since our scholar is mainly DPSing for the first Digititis, he essentially ignores this marker. Immediately after these debuffs apply, the raid will share 2 more Fluid Strikes. Any player affected with vulnerability up debuff at this time should obviously avoid sharing the cleave. Next up, another Wash Away. At this point, the hand will split into 2 and each tank will grab one. From this point on, Fluid Swing will apply a stacking debuff on each tank, and these hands must be tanked facing away from everyone else. Moments later, one of the hands will glow as either an open palm or a closed fist. If the glowing hand is open, the 2 hands must be dragged together. If the glowing hand is a fist, they must be dragged away. You have a few seconds before both hands will slam down and do raid-wide damage. If the hands were appropriately moved, this will do a small amount of damage. If it was done incorrectly or not fast enough, the hands will apply a debuff on all players, do massive damage, and you will probably wipe. Immediately after, Digititis will cast again, and players should quickly swap their appropriate markers. To keep it simple, the red marked player and the white mage will swap, while the scholar swaps with the affected tank. At this point, one of the hands will cast Equilibrium Concentration, which will transfer 4% health from one of the hands to the other. Players should identify the higher health hand and swap to it immediately. The group then has about 25 seconds to bring the 2 hands within 4% of each other before Hand of Pain is cast. Use cooldowns as necessary. If this is accomplished, Hand of Pain will do a manageable amount of damage. If you fail, the hands will debuff you, do massive damage, and you will probably wipe. Next, a hand will glow again, and tanks will move their hands appropriately. One last Fluid Swing to deal with before the hands return to the center and phase 3 begins. As with normal mode, Phase 3 will deal with a ton of ads that do their best to get to the outside. Should any ad reach the outside, they will explode, apply paralyze to everyone, deal massive damage, and you will probably wipe. Assigning DPS priorities, stun rotations, and pre-positioning for each wave will help you stay on top of things. There are 6 waves of pistons and gears, and I've listed these here. The pistons will cast mucilage, which should be interrupted. Assign players to each stun as necessary. If the cast goes off, the piston will sprint to the edge and you will probably wipe. The gear lubricants are much slower and gradually make their way to the edge. Burn these down as necessary. Tanks will need to watch for drainage in waves 2 and 4, which will tether to 2 random players and eventually cause them to explode. Each tank should grab a tether and move away from others before it explodes. Lastly, in waves 3 and 5, FERROFLUID will affect 2 sets of players by tethering them with either a positive or a negative marker. Similar markers need to move together near the center of the room to avoid being punted into the water, and opposite markers need to move across the platform from each other to avoid getting pulled in together. If these players are too close to their partner, they'll be debuffed and probably die to the next phase of mechanics, so handle your polarities appropriately. Damage is highly important in this phase, especially while handling mechanics. Ideally, you want to destroy each wave of ad as soon as or before the next wave spawns. Be sure to communicate any leftover ads that need to be burned down. Let's do a quick recap of each wave here. Phase 3 begins with 2 pistons. We have 2 assigned players stunning mucilage while the rest burns them down. Immediately after, drainage tethers will come out as the next wave of gears spawn. Tanks do their thing while DPS burn down the small ads. Split damage appropriately. Wave 3, we have 1 piston and 2 small gears. Assign 2 players to stun the piston and split damage. FERROFLUID will cast during this time as well, so all players must be ready to move immediately. After FERROFLUID, the next wave will spawn 4 gears and another 2 drainage tethers. Tanks will grab each tether while everyone else burns. Wave 5, another 3 gears will spawn and the group will again deal with FERROFLUID. The last wave of ads is 4 pistons. Each piston should have an assigned player to stun the mucilage. These must all be burned down before they reach the outside. Once all the ads are destroyed, we move on to phase 4. We begin this last phase with Cascade. This is a high damage raid-wide blast that the boss will cast throughout the rest of the encounter. Use mitigation cooldowns, heal, and shield as necessary. I like to think of each Cascade cast as a mini phase transition since it lines up with our tank swap and changes in mechanics. Cascade also places 3 large puddles around the room that will limit your space and eventually throw more mechanics at us. The specific locations of these puddles is random, but their rotation and abilities they cast are all the same. Our group will use the orientation of these puddles to reposition and preparation for certain mechanics, but we'll get to that soon. Immediately after Cascade, I recommend all players resume their assigned positions around the boss. An 8-man FERROFLUID will cast, and it's incredibly important that all players can quickly see who they're linked to, with what markers, and to adjust appropriately. Players will be knocked back or in and will move to their assigned positions after FERROFLUID. From this point forward, each fluid swing will apply a stacking debuff on the tank, and a tank swap will be necessary at around 4 stacks, which neatly coincides with each Cascade cast. Heal through the splash and make sure you're in your proper positions for the next combo of abilities. Next up, players will have to deal with SLUICE and PROTEAN wave essentially overlapping. Healers should prep for this combo with hots and shields, and I'd recommend baiting SLUICE and the first PROTEAN telegraphs in areas you don't expect to be standing for the second hit of PROTEAN wave. Essentially, as long as people are in their appropriate position during the second PROTEAN wave blast, you can do whatever you want leading up to it. Next up, another SLUICE and DIGITITIS combo. This time, 2 red markers will go out and each healer will have to swap with them. That means any free damage dealer needs to grab the tank's blue debuff. Ensure all markers are swapped appropriately. One last swing before the Cascade and tanks can swap. Heal through the Cascade and get ready for the next mini phase. At this point, the boss will mark up a healer with liquid jail, signified by this green marker. The affected healer should stand in the middle of the room in an area that has a clear line to the edge of the room, while all other players move away from them. Shortly after, the affected healer and anyone in their vicinity will be stunned, and a liquid limb will pick up the healer and begin to move them to the outside to drop them in the water. This hand must be destroyed before it reaches the outside. Use cooldowns or limit breaks as necessary. Once the hand is down, the healer will be released and everyone can get back to burning down the boss. Some more splashes and cleaves to heal through before the next Digititis. Again, same thing. Swap markers appropriately. Immediately after, the boss will cast an intense 6 set of splash, so healers be ready to heal through this and top everyone off before the next cascade. Another tank swap as Cascade casts and the third mini phase begins. The raid will adjust their positioning here based on the new location of the Cascade puddles around the room. We prefer to have the tank next to the Embolus puddle facing to the outside, with the raid stack behind. The off tank is to the left side of the raid stack, ready to intercept the drainage tether as soon as it spawns. The puddle to the right of the group will spawn a single Protean wave in the direction of a random player, so be sure to dodge this as necessary. At the same time, Throttle will be cast on a random player. This is a debuff that must be dispelled immediately or the affected player will die. FERROFLUID will cast at this time too, so it may be a good idea to save Swift Cast for this dispel. That is a lot of stuff happening at once, so let's quickly break it down. The raid is stacked behind the boss, essentially baiting the tether, with the off tank in position ready to go. The off tank grabs that tether and moves away from the group, ready to explode with a cooldown and a shield. The rest of the group is spreading to dodge Protean wave and getting ready for FERROFLUID. Healers are watching tanks and dispelling Throttle as soon as it comes up. Immediately after, 2 sets of FERROFLUID will be cast. Affected players need to move in or out based on their markers. Next, another Throttle to be dispelled, and the Embolus Tornado will flash and spawn a ball that will slowly make its way to where the boss was standing at the time. Should the ball hit the boss or anyone else, it will explode and you will probably wipe. As such, the main tank needs to move the boss as soon as that Embolus Tornado flashes. We take him to the edge of the room, with the rest of the raid ensuring they're nowhere near the path of the Embolus. Next, the off tank needs to be ready to grab the next drainage, while everyone dodges the Protean wave. At the same time, SLUICE will be cast, so remember to spread and avoid those AoE circles. Another Embolus will spawn from the tornado, and again the tank will be moving the boss back into the center to avoid the ball. Another cleave into yet another cascade. At this point, these 3 mini phases will repeat once more before the final enraged cascade. Everything is exactly the same, with the exception of which main tank is active in which mini phase, due to the nature of each tank swap. If you've made it this far, you already have everything you need to succeed. Congratulations on your loot, and get ready to embrace the metal. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.